Welcome back to the Tipsy Theology podcast. And if it's your first time here, just welcome. Thanks for being here. I like to give you guys a little treat sometimes. You've been good lately, so I wanted to reward you for that. And in order to that, I have a special guest today, Mr. Stephen Howell, Esquire. Local music guy, cool dude.
Yeah.
Does that makes sense?
Yeah. No, it's good to be here.
It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, having conversations that we said should be on a podcast.
Yeah, and now we're finally here, and I'm like a kid in a candy shop right now.
But that's probably how it should be, though, right? Like maybe have coffee a few times before you put like microphones in front of your mouth.
It's like I'm dating my guests.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to go that far, but...
And what's interesting? Today is episode number 49.
Oh, that's okay.
Isn't that cool?
Okay, I was wondering why you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, and everyone's like, why is that cool? Well, this is why it's cool, because, see, the connection between the number 49 and we're going to talk about Passover today, since it's Passover week. They'll be hearing this after this week.
Yeah, but it's still in the season.
Yeah,
right?
It's the heart of it.
Yeah, unless it comes out next year at Passover.
That actually be...
We can wait.
I don't know if I want to wait that long. We'll just do another one at that point. But so it's like, okay, 49 Passover. Is that even a connection? Well, to be honest, it's not. But I like to find connections where there's not one. And what's interesting about it is, so the Passover is significant. It's a significant Jewish festival commemorating the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt, as described in the book of Exodus. And according to Jewish tradition, the Passover is celebrated on the 15th day of the Hebrew month in Nisan, which typically falls in March or April on the Gregorian calendar. That's the one we use today.
Yeah.
Now, the connection to the number 49 comes from the counting of the Omer. In Jewish tradition, the period between Passover and Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks, or Pentecost,
Yep.
is marked by the counting of the Omer. The Omer is a measure of barley that was brought as an offering to the temple in Jerusalem during this time. The counting of the Omer begins on the second day of Passover and continues for a total of 49 days. Pretty cool.
That's wild.
Leading up to Shavuot. This period of counting is known as the counting of the Omer. Pretty surprising title, I'm sure.
Which is barley.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a measure of barley there. So the 49 itself doesn't have like a specific significance to the story, but it's kind of that gap in between this period of the Passover where we celebrate and recognize this day in Exodus, this event that happened, leading to, in the Old Testament, the giving of the Torah, and then in the New Testament, the giving of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
So it's kind of, I don't know, I thought it was kind of fun.
Yeah, everything in the Bible is intentional.
Yes.
So, yeah, if something is interesting or reminds you of something, there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of like, if it's weird, it's probably important.
Yeah, like if you're writing a book, you're not just going to throw random numbers in it.
Right.
Unless the numbers are intentionally random.
Yeah.
And then the reader knows that.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
But same thing with wording, like the phrasing you're using, the tenses you're using, it all intentionally links up. Because if you're writing something, it's not much different than if you're painting something.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And it's kind of, I think that's what's so cool about the consistency inside of Scripture is like, here you have thousands of years in between these periods, yet all these things line up. It's like, that's either a really good writer or...
Yeah, I mean, how far back are we going to go on Passover? Because when you talk about that, it makes me think of like setting into motion. So like the cosmos being set into motion and the idea that potentially things that are happening now were set into motion at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's kind of what prophecy is
Yeah,
It's
true.
foretelling things that God already knows.
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, before we jump way too far into this, because I know we're right on the precipice, and I'm so excited. What are we drinking today?
Whatever you put in my mug,
Careful now.
which is nothing.
We have cran-apple,
Yes.
and sponsored by no one. Don't look at the...
I feel like that it's funny because it says new look, same bold taste,
Yeah.
but it actually looks less like what it is to me as far as like what my memory goes. So it took me a while to like, is that actually what I think it is? So maybe no one will know.
Do you think there's because it's just red? What if they just lied about the apple? They're like, it's just more
I
cran.
see. Yeah, I think the trick to that is like it's lighter. So like
that's
if
fair.
it were just cranberry, it'd be darker red.
That's actually probably like a deeper red.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know that they measure how dark the red is in the juice.
They're like, we don't actually care.
Yeah, I don't-
So what brought you to being a lover of cran-apple?
it has an amazing amount of sugar in it.
Enough said.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like I don't like. There's something about cranberry juice where it's like really dry. So when you drink cranberry juice, it's both not pleasant
Yeah.
and pleasant at the same time. It's a little bit like drinking purified water, where your brain is like, okay, I'm drinking water, but my mouth is getting more dry somehow, as if it were salt water. I don't know that we should talk
interesting.
about purified water, but
We sure can though.
but yeah, I think when they add the apple in it sweetens it up a little bit more.
Well, hey, cheers to you. I'm excited to try it. I don't think
You've never had cran-apple?
I ever have.
I mean, it's.
I'm
worth
not a
it.
big juice guy.
Okay.
It's I don't like drinking straight mixer.
I understand.
No, I do like juice, but it's been a long time since I've had it, so I'm
Yeah.
excited to taste this.
I shouldn't have put that down. Here. Sorry.
Redo it. That's sugary. I like that.
Yeah. But it has an aroma to it right before you drink it, right?
Yeah, it's like it kind of makes apple juice better and cranberry juice better.
Yeah.
Cuz you get like the initial hit of apple, but it's like that smoothness of cranberry. Cuz cranberry is not an overwhelming flavor.
Yeah, something about this just makes me think that like I just have this like cut to image of really we're just like 4-year-old kids sitting in oversized clothes talking intellectually about juice.
Pretending pretzel rods are cigars.
Yeah, like pretending like we're adults drinking wine. It's like you know what I mean? It's
got an oaky afterbirth.
yeah.
But
I
it does
just
have a nice
imagine
smell.
myself like that. I don't know. Maybe you can cut to that.
Well, I think I'm done talking about the flavor. Said all I need to say. Now.
It's good though, because if you just have straight cranberry juice, like immediately your throat's dry.
That's true.
But I think it is good for your.
It actually
I don't
is
know.
drying out as we speak.
I know that's what I'm. Yeah. Sorry, we should have had some
That's pretty.
water too, right?
It's kind of fun. It does give me like the reminder of like drinking like a really dry wine.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's not dissimilar to like. That's kind of. I don't know. I guess with apple juice, it's just straight sugar.
Yeah.
But when you add cranberry in, it kind of makes it a little
Makes
bit
it
more adult.
healthy.
Yeah.
Then you
Yeah.
add some prune juice and you go a little past adulthood.
Yeah, my kids don't like cran grape juice.
Oh,
Like
okay.
I won't drink a lot of soda, but I'll have juice, which is really
On this
bad.
podcast, we call it pop.
Okay,
We're-
sorry. Yeah, sorry. You're the Midwest kid. I'm the Central Florida kid.
No, it's good. I need to learn. So
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's all wrong depending on where you are,
that's fair.
right? So technically, you're wrong because you're here.
That is true.
So if I
I'm
were
a
in
foreigner.
Yeah, if I were in the Midwest, I would be wrong. But it's your podcast, so now I'm wrong.
Oh shoot! No, everyone's right on this podcast, except for when I disagree.
Or the comments disagree.
Oh, that's true. Then everybody's wrong. So I do want to ask you, and I hope you're comfortable with this question. I didn't ask you beforehand.
We'll see.
What are your thoughts on alcohol?
That's a good question. I think that it's a specific question that should be like that you should talk about slightly more general, in the sense that like I think if alcohol or if anything, any substance, and when I say substance, I don't mean like Schedule 1. You know what I mean? Like
Okay,
I'm not
yeah.
talking about like we're not talking about I mean like this what the what's in this cup is a substance. So
Yeah,
like
yeah.
with anything, I think if you say it and it makes you uncomfortable, that probably means something. So like I think one of the things like I'm on stage a lot,
Yeah.
and one of the things about one of the things about being on stage is I don't want to think about what I'm wearing. And so if I put something on that makes me feel uncomfortable, then I don't want to wear that on stage, right?
Yeah, because
So
you'll be thinking about the whole time.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that there's levels to that where potentially I think maybe as you mature, there are things that you're less uncomfortable with or less shameful of. But I don't know that then opens you up to do things that potentially could be harmful to you. So I think in the general sense, to the specific question of how I feel about alcohol, I think everybody has a different relationship to it,
Yeah.
based on history and and also there's there's just so many. It's such a loaded thing, right?
It really is.
Because
yeah,
like
absolutely.
that's why like even right now, talking about my dad's dad and then my mom's grandfather both were like did their best but were alcoholics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like they say like that can run in your blood, and there's things that like you can have addictive personality, and
Right.
there's things like, and the Bible even talks about like generations being cursed 2 to 3 generations, but righteousness or good things going for many more generations than that. And I just butchered that quote, but that passage. But essentially, kind of going to that, like it's not helpful to me. So it's just not in the mix of my rhythm.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So like I think for me it is one of those things where when you say like what are your thoughts on alcohol, I think it would be not much different than breaking down like would I need to go to a personal question, like what are my individual thoughts on alcohol for me specifically, for my household, and when I go to that I think about what is my interaction with it, has it been good or bad, has it, like as a Christian, has it pushed me closer to Jesus or has it taken me further away from him? And if it's done neither of those things, then I think it also is like comfortable clothes on stage. I don't know that it's even really something to think I've thought about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think for me, it has made me uncomfortable because of history and my family, and interactions that I've had with it over the course of my life. So I'm also the type of person that like, I wouldn't say have an addictive personality, but I could like here's an example. My wife was joking with me about this the other day. I may not have like a addictive thing. I'm more what would you call it? I think maybe impulsive. So like, and that doesn't necessarily mean like I'm just gonna go buy something random.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's what we think about. But I think more so like I'm impulsive in the sense that like I bought a hat. Ironically enough, I bought this hat, and the hat was from this boutique thing. Like it shipped to me, and it had Gushers in it.
Oh, heck yeah.
And I was like, man, I haven't had Gushers in so long. And then I had a pack of Gushers, and then I went to Sam's and bought like a 100 pack of Gushers. And then I literally ate Gushers, like probably 3 to 5 packs of Gushers a day for 3 months.
That's a lifestyle I want to live.
But like at some point it like just kind of all then you just have like this
Just
gel in
sits.
your stomach.
Yeah.
And it's not great. But like it's like that. It's like so like that's kind of my personality a little bit, where I might be impulsive and focus on one thing for a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think alcohol was similar. I had a similar relationship to that in different periods of my life where, you know, I would get in a rhythm. Like if I drive past this thing every day, why am I getting a donut every morning? Oh, it's because I keep driving past Dunkin' Donuts on my way.
Just priming that.
Yeah. And I think that there's some of that that's true for everybody. So like alcohol in general, I think maybe think about why you're doing what you're doing. And that's even like eating a donut every day.
Yeah.
It's the same conversation. It's like, what is actually me taking care of what the Lord has given me to steward? So, you know what I mean? And in some instances, alcohol does help what is being stewarded.
True.
In the case of Paul and Timothy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he's actually saying, hey, this is helpful for your body. You should have this,
Yeah.
you know? And he's trying to abstain from it because maybe he doesn't have the best relationship. I don't know, that's speculating, but like,
Yeah.
or the appearance of, or whatever it is in the position that he's in. And I think that speaks to it a little bit as well is, I think as just like, gushers, like, I think as many things as, have my attention that aren't Jesus, that's potentially long-term detrimental.
Yeah.
So I think for me, my personal feeling in relationship with alcohol would be that it potentially would be something I would look up in 3 months and be like, I haven't thought about this in 3 months, and it's potentially affecting my sleep. Maybe it's maybe it's affecting. So if it's affecting my sleep, maybe I'm not like maybe if you know maybe it's not making me a terrible person, and I'm not having that interaction with it, and I'm just having some before bed or whatever that is. But then my sleep is bad, and then I'm not as nice to my wife. I'm not getting, you know what I mean? It's like, then it's like, okay, well, it's not necessarily the alcohol that's making me do this, but it's affecting everything else. So, and the same would be true about if I ate a slice of cake before bed.
Right.
So like, I also try not to do that.
Yeah.
But that's a personal thing, you know?
Absolutely.
So,
you know, something you said too that really stuck out to me that I kind of want to see if we can expand this a little bit is on the idea of like what's helpful.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point to bring out with this is regardless of like your personal views on it, which do play a role into this next part of it. It's like, is it helpful? Some people might be like, it's not wrong, it's totally fine. It's like, okay, but is it helpful for you to partake in this?
Right.
And I think even when it comes to like being on stage or being in front of people, it's like we have, I think to some degree, we have a responsibility to what we present to those people. And it's like, are we being helpful to them?
Right.
Do you think that plays a role into a lot of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, specifically, if you have a job to do or you have a situation that you have taken the responsibility of doing, then like whether that's, you know, the drive-through at McDonald's or it's, you know, being the engineer of a train or whatever it is, like you really, I think if you're a Christian, you're trying to grow and develop and live according to the gospel.
Yeah.
I think that one of those pieces is no matter what your job is, that you are trying to show up in the best way possible. So I think on a basic level, yes, but also because of what I do specifically, like as not just a musician, but also a worship leader, in that sense, I do feel, even though I'm not a Levite, I feel in some ways in the tradition and connected to that, which as we get into the topic of Passover, I feel like that's a really interesting thing. Because like when you talk about, so, and maybe that's the biggest thing is like, what is helpful and framing, like, what does my job and what does my lifestyle, like, how does all of that play in? Essentially what we're saying is what's the fruit of it?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what we're saying is this producing good fruit? And like to not use specifically biblical language, like is like at the end of the day, am I productive? Right? Am I productive, or am I building something that is not productive? Therefore, like if I'm building a business and I get to the end of a quarter and I'm making less than I brought in, something's not working, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think all of that plays into it. Like, is this helpful? Is this good for me? Is my rhythm like, and it could be anything. But I think for me, like maybe alcohol was one of those things for me that I was like, doesn't make me run faster.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like,
absolutely.
but like, and then I like to, because of the position that I'm in, I like to associate myself personally, with the tradition that I'm a part of. So what that means is I like to associate not just with the immediate tradition, as far as like I come out of the Pentecostal tradition, which has roots in the holiness movements, into the Great Awakening, the Methodist movements, and there's like that back line of things where it's being set apart and abstaining from things. In that sense, that would also be true in the gospel of being set apart. But going back into like the Levitical elements of the priests in the temple and them being conductors of worship and what that looked like. And honestly, that could probably be a whole other podcast.
Absolutely.
Because like one of the side note things I've been thinking about with that is like a Levitical priest, what they were doing, like feeling wise, was brutal work. Like on a day where they were doing sacrifices, you're talking about hundreds of people coming through with hundreds of animals that are alive that they then they're butchers.
Yeah.
So a Levitical priest is taking an animal, and they are, with knowledge of how the Lord laid this out, is properly preparing this animal to be sacrificed as a fragrant offering. And part of that was like taking the blood and spilling it or throwing it across.
Yeah.
So like think about that. Like if I'm on stage at a church, like the church is cleaned before everybody gets there. And when they leave, it needs to be cleaned again, right?
Right.
But there's not blood everywhere.
True.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like in the altar space, I mean, the walls are covered in blood.
Yeah.
But like you're also like the fragrance of that space is actually murder. Like maybe that's too strong of a word.
I mean, it's just burning flesh.
It's burning flesh.
Yeah.
Hair. Like like there's and you're doing all of this, the like, the iron of the blood, like the, you know what I mean? Like, so you have all of these like really visceral things that are happening. And also like, how exhausting would that be?
True.
I mean, it's like it's not like Publix deli, like next person in line with the tickets. Right. So it's like, but at the same time, so like thinking about it in that sense, I think the preparation, that's why I think even the Levitical priests, the preparation was so intense. Getting them prepared, like what they were eating, their cleanliness process, and I think in some ways it was actually what was best for them, like for them to be physically cleaned. Well, yeah, if you just spent all day like butchering animals, throwing the blood against the altar, like you need to know what like how do I get clean?
Yeah.
And literally just take a shower the right way. You know what I mean?
It's true.
So like there are pieces of that are actually just practical. Like instruction in the Old Testament, that's just practical knowledge of like, hey, if you do this, like that will last longer, or you'll be healthier. Like don't eat this because it's not good for your digestive system.
Right.
But you guys don't know what that is.
Yeah.
So like, let me just tell you, don't eat this instead of, And then, we take it as like, well, I want to eat whatever I want. Well, okay, but like, 50 Little Debbie's in, it's not going to feel good. Or 3 months of Gushers, it's like, what is going on?
It takes a toll.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And so like God's instruction there is like, it is ultimately helpful. And so I think that plays all the way through. Even when you look at like, what are our rhythms? Because as New Testament Christians, you look at the instruction on that, and it's not nearly as extensive.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the stuff is lifted. It's like, don't call something unclean that I've called clean.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Christians can eat pork. And it's like, well, great, but is it actually good to eat a hot dog? You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, someone would argue like, who even knows if it is pork or not? Right?
But Sam's Club's keeping it cheap.
That's definitely not pork.
No.
Brought to you by Sam's Club.
Oh, I wish. That dog in me.
But the thing is about Sam's Club, though, is like there's literally no cheaper place to eat.
It's true.
It's wild how cheap it is.
Yeah. I think that was actually part of their marketing, which is like, we have to keep this cheap.
But I mean, not even buying groceries. Now we're just talking about Sam's. But like, because if you
how do you know we're two grown adults in our 30s?
Yeah,
I'm not 30 yet. I'm very close.
Well, I am. But yeah, I don't know, because you can spend $250 all of a sudden at Sam's.
Oh yeah.
But then you could eat like 10 hot dogs and it costs you $12.
It's true.
You're like, and they give you like 7 drinks, and you're like, what is happening?
I always feel like a monster when I shop at Sam's Club.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you can only buy boxes that are 4 times bigger than you want.
Yeah.
Like, they give you these massive shopping carts, and you're like, there's no way I'm going to fill this. Oh, 1 box filled it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, also the question is like, can I eat this before it expires?
Yeah. It's a personal challenge.
Yeah, okay. But some of that stuff, though, will last forever.
That's
so
true.
it actually doesn't. Yeah.
That's a Little Debbie snacks.
I know, and the Gushers, right?
You bring up an interesting point, and I do wonder, because I've said I have an addictive personality before, but maybe I'm just like very obsessed with things for a period of time. Maybe it's that impulsiveness.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's possible to get addicted to sparkling water, but I managed to somehow. There was probably 2 weeks where all I would think about during the day was just drinking a sparkling water.
Now, thinking about it is a completely different thing.
Or it's just like, man,
so if your
I
thoughts are
can't
there,
wait
that's
to go home.
interesting.
It's like,
Yeah.
I'm good for now. Thank you, though. Shout out to A-Bear.
Yeah, I don't know.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Maybe in a little bit. We'll top it off. Thanks, man.
Yeah, so I don't know if that adds another layer to it, probably.
Yeah.
Because I was at work being like, I cannot wait to just crack open that.
Well, and I mean, you bring up a really profound point when it comes to temptation as Jesus describes it in the New Testament, because it's like dwelling on things. Like I have found myself in a sense where and this is actually I feel like this is one of the scariest things, and like as an adult, this is one of the things that like I feel like is somehow easier, because it's like if you're a person that has migraines, you can see it coming on. I don't deal with that. My wife deals with that a little bit, but yeah, like they know it's coming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's something about temptation where if I want to partake in this sin, then I could actually, let me not watch this movie or TV show, but let me watch this one, and it'll start to shift me towards this feeling, right? And so there are things where you're like, mentally, you're like, oh, I need to, like, I'm actually setting myself up. I'm actually putting myself in the headspace of being tempted with the completion of sin, right? So like that is like a scary. So yeah, when you talk about like the impulsiveness, it's different when you're like, I get home and I go, oh, there's Gushers, like I can have that, versus like all day I'm thinking about sparkling water.
Yeah. I always take it to another level. No, that's a really good point too. Thinking about that, and even how do we set ourselves up? Because I think there are so many people, and I'm just going to go ahead and go here, since it's such a profound issue, I think, now, which is like the idea of pornography and how prevalent that is for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because there are some people that, I mean, I myself was here at a point too, and I know a lot of other people that are, where it's like, I just can't stop.
Sure.
And it's like, well, you're living a life. You're setting yourself up to what you said, to shift your mind to then go further than you want.
Yeah.
And it's those little tiny decisions throughout the day that lead you to dwell on it.
Yeah, but it's the same thing with alcohol, right?
Right.
So it's that type of thing. It's like, well, I like who I am when I drink.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not real happy right now, but I'm a happy person when I drink.
Yeah.
So let me set myself up to get there, right?
Yeah.
But then the other
You're
side
kind of breaking
of that,
down those barriers in your own mind.
yeah, but then what I'm doing is I'm putting myself in the headspace of going, I want to do this thing that will make me happy for a moment, but I'm actually shifting my whole body, my mindset, I'm shifting it towards that. So I'm turning all of my attention, my direction, I'm turning it towards this moment of temporary happiness.
Yeah.
So it's not just going like, oh, I'm just going to have a drink and I hope it doesn't lead to anything. It's like, no, I feel like right now I can't be happy, so I'm going to start moving in that direction.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there's an interesting thing about temptation, where sometimes temptation is, it happens when you want to sin, not necessarily sometimes leading to sin. So like temptations can all of a sudden just happen to you.
Yes.
So like there can be a temptation that just, it comes upon you. All of a sudden you're tempted in a moment, like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there are moments of seeking out temptation because you want to sin.
Yeah.
Which is a whole
That's
different
so true.
thing. And I actually don't even know that that's the proper gospel terminology for that. Like maybe that type of temptation is actually closer linked to habitual practice, which leads down a whole nother conversation, right? So like maybe the habitual practice is actually like thinking on the sin actively. And then in order to make yourself not feel bad about it, you try and set your atmosphere up for temptation so that when you sin, it's the temptation that made you do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And that's like that's a difficult thing. And that's why like I've had this conversation a lot recently where it's hard. Like I've always lived in the same city, but I haven't perpetually been in the same season of life. So like when a season is changing, a job or a relationship or whatever it is that a season is changing my life, my location, the things I see every day doesn't change. And that's hard to make that. It's much easier to change seasons by shifting what you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
But with walking away from or moving away from sin, I think that is recognizing what temptation is and not using it as a tool to make yourself feel less shameful about acting on a sin, but instead knowing what the temptation triggers are and using that honestly as the knowledge of that is honestly grace for us to go, I have recognition of the temptation that leads to the sin. Like I know what that looks like.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like. I can feel it coming on, or if I watch this thing or look this direction or go this way, then I know that it will put me in the mindset of the temptation that will lead to the sin that I ultimately want to do, right?
Yeah.
Like as Paul says, like I do what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's that, I think it's that piece of like, sometimes I think as we get older, we tend to want to shift our thoughts and our minds towards the state of temptation in order to fulfill that sin desire.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult thing. I feel like that's a difficult thing to talk about because like in some ways it's just very theoretical. But I feel like there is a grounded nature of it in the sense that I think we all know what it feels like to place our attention on something and recognize in the moment that your attention is on that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So like, I mean, it happens when like you can either just reach over and pick up the glass, or if you don't really know where it is, you look at it, and that's the act of turning your attention to it in order to focus specifically on that. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think sometimes I think there are things like that. But when you bring up pornography, one of the things that one of the things that I feel like with that subject in particular that nobody really talks about enough, and I feel like some people are starting to talk about it more, honestly and ironically, the same way that people are talking about Nephilim more.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, if you look at the Old Testament and the kings and the judges over and over again through Chronicles and through First and Second Kings, it's like there was this guy who became the king or became the judge or whatever it is, and he acted wickedly in the way of his father, and he didn't take down the Asherah, he didn't take down the idols in the high places, and he continued to do what was wrong in the sight of the Lord. And then you see other people like Hezekiah who actually flips the script on that and takes down all of that stuff. And it's one of those things where, like, you kind of go like, okay, well, what were those things and why were they, like, why was it important to the Lord? And I think there's relationship in putting your attention on something is not just like in your mind, your thoughts, but relating what's in your thoughts to physical places. So like just as an example, the places of worship. So going to church, I think, is important because it helps you among a myriad of other things. It helps your body know what your mind should be focused on. So like you just step into the space and you're like, oh yeah, like if you've ever driven somewhere and you don't realize how you got there and you walk in and you're like, oh, I'm at Publix. Oh, because I needed milk. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, I came to church on Sunday. Why? Because I need to turn my attention back to God. Right? So like there are these things like that. And then through the Old Testament, it's stuff like that, like the Asherah. And you have all these like, honestly, overtly sexual acts that dealt with the worship of demonic and evil spirits.
Right.
And there was a give and take there between the people that were worshiping those idols and Asherah. Asherah were specifically like, you know, maybe that is, maybe modern day Asherah is porn, you know?
Yeah.
And like that's a potential manifestation of it, right?
Right.
And then, you know, they talk about with pornography, the sex trafficking involved in that. And then you look back, and I heard somebody the other day talk about that, and this would really take us off on a rabbit trail, but that like the genesis of sex trafficking is Genesis 6.
Yeah. Yeah.
And looking at that and going like, okay, sons of God mated with human women.
Right.
In an exchange for something, potentially. Right? Exchange for dominion on the earth of their sons, and then potentially knowledge to the fathers of the daughters of the, you know,
it's true.
There's this exchange that's happening, and the exchange is happening through sex.
Yeah.
And there's such an emphasis on the body and protecting that.
Yeah.
Throughout Scripture, particularly in the New Testament and Romans, and just I mean, and even in you know, your Ephesians, like in the marriage relationship, where the man's body is not his, it's the wife's.
Yeah.
You know, the wife's body is not hers, it's her husband's, and they're to give themselves to one another. It's that type of thing where it's such a sacred thing that, So, are we having like 3 or 4 different podcasts?
I'm like, man,
sorry.
All right, this is going to be a 4-hour episode. I'm ready to go because we've got so much to do. We got so much.
I know.
So much content here now that we could go into.
Yeah, but we were
so
like
cool.
Passover though, right?
Yeah. And actually, that's probably good to just like
hard cut.
Yeah, I think we got to hard cut it because I was like, man, I want to keep going down this path, but
yeah, but I don't know. I think all of that stuff. I mean, I just pulled it back to Genesis 6, so that's pre-Moses.
Which I mean, and it's important to bring that up too, because that is such a significant event, and I think that's why we have so many people talking about, the Nephilim, which you brought up, in like what happened here, because it is such a significant event in the story of Scripture.
Yeah.
That hasn't been given the attention it deserves, I think.
Sure.
And not that it's the main point,
right?
But it's like this is a big deal into what happened, and especially, even when we look at Passover here, it's like, okay, so what is the original story? This is my segue.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so like Passover is here to remind us at the time, remind the Jewish people of what happened, what God brought you through. So like, okay, so let's start there. What did God bring them through?
Yeah.
And like, what happened?
Yeah. So one of the things, which I don't know, and the funny thing is, like, I'm just now remembering that I started watching this, but there's a new Netflix show. It's a docuseries on the life of Moses.
Yeah.
And I started watching the first episode.
Andrew, my roommate, was just telling me about that. I haven't watched it yet, but I'm excited to.
Yeah. So it's great.
He says hi, by the way.
Hi, Andrew. Andrew's such a sweet guy. He's a great guy.
He'll never listen to this.
Great. Let's talk the rest of the time about Andrew. No, but yeah, no, I did. I started watching it, and it's great. And they do an interesting thing where they dramatize it, and then they talk to like different. They talk to scholars, and then they have like. I always feel weird when there's like one evangelical pastor on there, and he has like the nicest background. Maybe I shouldn't get into this.
Uh-oh.
It's like all the professors and stuff are like, it's like a very meek, like looks like they're just like in a museum or something. There's like a white wall behind them, and then
just every book they own.
Yeah, and and then the evangelical pastor is like, has a perfect haircut, and the wall behind him is like a fireplace that looks like it has like golden inlays, and you're like, what even is this?
Kind of sick.
Yeah. But it's not like he's 70 with a facelift. He's
right.
He's like a younger guy, and you're like, what kind of house is this? Like, is this immediately I was. This goes back all the way back to the beginning of like, is it good? Is it fruitful?
Yeah.
Like, why even put a background in when as soon as I see it, I go, come on. Like, what it's blurred out, fair. And I'm still going like, why is this guy's, anyways.
Yeah, and I will say on that quickly, I think it's one of those things which is interesting. So it's like, it's not that it's wrong, where it's like, I want people to be successful. I want pastors to have a home that they enjoy and a car that they like. But then to that point, it's like, at what point is it not helpful? Yeah. And with like a lot of the situations around like, how shady some pastors are.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not a good look sometimes.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think I think the weird thing to me is
I'm not saying that to like don't nerf your lifestyle just because I said that, but it's like
no. But it goes back to like what I was saying about like clothes on stage. It's it's as simple as like maybe think about the fact that you're a modern evangelical pastor. You're going to be on this show with other scholars, of which you're probably not at the same tier as their scholarship.
Yeah.
So you're already going to, you're already going to kind of like not look quite as smart as them when they're talking about and maybe don't like, maybe go like, hey, let's not shoot this in my house.
Yeah.
Or let's shoot it like against this white wall.
Yeah.
Or potentially he's on a set and they're setting him up to have that type of background. Yeah. And to be fair, that's probably what it is.
Could be.
But if I was that guy, I'd be like, hey, not this. This is not the right spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
we have an establishing shot.
I think the thing that bothers me about it is the Jesus side of it. And again, like I feel like as a, mid-30s millennial Christian that, like just I feel like some of it is like I don't want to like don't downplay success.
Yeah.
Don't downplay the Lord's blessing.
Right.
But to what extent is it helpful to anybody?
Yeah.
Because the Lord blessing you is for the intent of your ability to bless others. In fact, the blessing comes from being a blessing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if the blessing comes in a righteous way, it's coming from being a blessing. So I think the cynical side of my mind goes, well, if your house looks like that, then your congregation's house better look better than yours.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Fair.
It's like everybody in your
Fair.
congregation should have better houses than that. Cause then it's like, yeah. And I don't mean like, again, I don't want to like, that's the stereotypical side of the millennial. I'm not saying
Yeah.
like,
It's that like the
dump
appearance of
everybody's
evil.
money in the altar and everybody take the same amount home. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I'm
fair.
not, it's not that's early church socialist
Yeah.
space. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing either, but I'm not saying that we have an ordinance to live that way.
Right. Right.
And stewarding what we've been given and, living in the blessing, like, yeah, that's all great.
Yeah.
That's yeah. I'm just trying not to go another,
That's fair. So
to,
Moses.
yeah. So Moses, yeah. So there's a lot of like one of the things, and to be honest with you, I didn't really even look up if this is true, but I'm going to reference it.
Right on.
Because
My
I thought it
favorite.
was fascinating and it's on a Netflix special. So it's got to be true. So I'm hoping that maybe they reference it, but I'll just say I'll just going back to the number 49 and talking about the interesting things with that. There's a lady on there who is a Hebrew scholar that starts talking about how when Moses is born in Exodus 2, it says that depending on what translation you're reading, but the simple English would be that Moses' mother, Miriam, I believe, or is that caretaker? I shouldn't have even tried for the name.
I don't know for sure, but that sounds right.
Yeah,
But it doesn't mean it is.
There's a Miriam in the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it says Moses is born, and then there's like an aside within that statement where it says, and she like basically looked upon him and saw that he was good, right? Or saw that he was fine.
Yeah.
I think the ESV says fine, which what she was saying in the documentary was that the Hebrew in that the phrase would be, and then she saw that he was good or it was good. And that was the first time the same phrase was being used again in Exodus 2 that was being used in Genesis 1.
Wow.
Which I was like, man, I love that stuff.
That's cool.
I love when you like the Hebrewism element of like, it's so poetic.
Right.
Because who writes Genesis? Right? Like we believe that Moses wrote that down from tradition. But Moses isn't born until Exodus 2. Right? So you have 50 chapters of the whole like kind of origin setup.
Yeah.
And the up and down fall of creation and humanity and what all of that looks like and the setup of man's dominion on the earth. And then in Exodus 2, you kind of have this beginning moment and then one of the things I liked about what they talked about, and I knew this, but just reiterating it, Moses is a key figure in, I believe, 3 different traditions. So he's prominently featured in the Quran.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And then and then obviously the Torah. And then I'm guessing, like, that's why I'm kind of blanking. The third one, I think that they were just saying in the Christian tradition.
Okay.
So the biblical canon, right? So you're looking at like the Jewish tradition, which the Jewish tradition does not include the New Testament. So like that's kind of like that's where, because I think people will be like, well, aren't Christians from the Jewish? Yeah, they are. Like, the Gentiles, like you come through the Jewish tradition, but the Jewish tradition stops at a certain point. The Hebrew tradition. So the Jewish faith has Moses as a key founding figure. Yeah. Yeah. And then so does the Quran. And then so does the Christian faith. Yeah. So you have this key figure all of a sudden. Because who writes Genesis, and then who takes the children of Israel to the promised land? Yeah. So you have, which is an interesting piece, but like, I always find that interesting, mainly because when we talk about like Passover Moses is pretty critical to that story.
Yeah.
Right?
He plays a significant role.
Yeah. So like the setup of that where you kind of have this, all of a sudden this reset, which I feel like happens a lot. Like Genesis through Exodus, it feels like there's several resets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to try and name all of them, but there's more than 3. Let's just say that.
Well, I think that's a big one, even with like leading into the situation where the Exodus has to happen. It's like God gives a command in the beginning: be fruitful, multiply.
Right.
And then here we have Abraham, who's just kind of wandering around.
Yeah.
And he's just like, yeah, I got some sheep, and that's what I do. And God's like, all right, you're my guy, and you're gonna have tons of kids. Like the nation will come from you. And he's like, okay, I don't have any kids.
Yeah, but also like think about the retelling from Abraham, like the hubris in Abraham. The perceived hubris, right?
That's fair.
Because he seems like he's portrayed like a pretty humble guy throughout. And I think he was. I mean, I think even the New Testament talks about his obedience counted to him as righteousness.
Yeah.
Like
absolutely.
he seems like a pretty meek guy.
Yeah.
Especially because like he didn't, he stayed with his father. Like he stayed under the leadership of his dad until his dad passed away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was like 75.
Yeah, true.
So you're like, I mean, that's, but
It's a pretty loyal guy.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we see his loyalty throughout that, even to the Lord.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think it's interesting where we have God gives this command and we're not doing it.
Right.
And he's like, okay, can we go ahead and do this?
Yeah.
And then we have the moment where we see, Joseph, who gets sold into Egypt.
Right.
Which he's a huge significant player in, a Seder, in a Passover meal. But then we see the Lord who's like, okay, you guys need to go into Egypt so everyone doesn't die.
Right.
And it's not just the soon-to-be Israelites, but it's nations around that too. Like, there's this huge famine coming. Let's all get in here.
Yeah.
And then the problem wasn't that they went there, it was that they never left. Because God's plan wasn't like, yeah, you stay in Goshen. He's like, no, get saved and then leave. Go back to the promised land. You're in the land that I promised you.
Yeah.
But they never leave. But they do the command that God gave them in the beginning, which was be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
And then it's like, then they find themselves in this captivity because of that.
Yeah, the sojourners in the foreign land.
Yes.
I don't know why I tried to say that word.
Sojourner.
It just feels like a cool word to say.
It's a good word.
Sojourners in a foreign land. Because like you see that throughout. I mean, Joseph, not the firstborn, right?
Right.
In fact, go through the Old Testament and try and find a firstborn that actually ends up, doing something good. Most of them throw everything away. And
True.
At the end of the day, like, the tradition of the time was the firstborn gets everything.
Yeah.
But the gospel story is the first shall be last and the last shall be first.
Yeah.
So you see that even through the Old Testament, which is really interesting. But so you have Joseph like that. And then you have them stay in the land, right?
Yeah.
And then when they're in the land, they're fruitful and multiply, like you say. But it is God's distinction of his people in a foreign land. So it's one of those things where it's almost not even them doing it.
Yeah.
It's, well,
yes, but
it is like, it is this, it's their action to follow that command, be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah.
But it's also the Lord's hand upon them as a people set apart, even in a foreign land.
Yes.
Which is also a theme in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So even when his people are, well, I say Old Testament, it's in the whole Bible. As New Testament believers, we are in the world, but not of the world.
Yes.
We're foreign.
Yeah.
And so and that's kind of coming into your identity, like salvation is shedding off the flesh, right? So like you have that as a common theme all the way through. But I love that image of, yeah, and Goshen is like really close to the capital. Like they're right in the heart of everything.
Yeah.
And so like
Yeah.
that's one of those things where you see like, yes, them following that command, them staying together, and then the Lord separating them by making them prosperous.
Yes.
So blessing his people, not because of what they're doing, but because of who they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the land of Egypt, they don't belong there, but they're prospering not because they don't belong there, not because of like their actions, but because of who they are, which is God's people.
Right.
So like there's so much beauty in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we see that in Deuteronomy 32 where God says, but they will be my portion.
Yeah.
And we see the Lord's hand in blessing them. Yeah, when they, especially when they obey.
Right.
When we obey.
Right.
So it's cool. So we see that, and then we see this lead into the idea of, not the idea of, it happened, slavery.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal. And then we see the rise of Moses coming out of this, who is the person God chooses to deliver them out of Egypt.
Right. Yeah, they actually talked about that in a documentary that like indentured servanthood or different ways of like that it was unusual that an entire people would become slave to the state. So like an entire people in Egypt becoming slave to the to Egypt itself. That was actually unusual in the history of Egypt. That people would have been like prisoners of war. People would have been sold potentially into slavery because
like
of debt.
Individual people.
Yeah, but for an entire nation within, kind of like later we see them taken to Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like they even kind of talk about that it's like this unusual thing where all of a sudden slavery in Egypt is also unusual to Egypt. That it would be an entire nation enslaved within the nation of Egypt.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, you think about that and like, I mean, yeah, I don't know, that would be potentially very difficult to control.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why, and that was part of the point that they made was that the Pharaoh initially was afraid of them. And it was his son, or the preceding Pharaoh, or his nephew, I think it was, the preceding Pharaoh who dug in deeper and then made them slaves. Yeah. So they were there for a while before they were actually slaves.
Because before that, it was kind of like, hey, do this work for us. And then it started getting progressively worse and worse. And yeah.
Yeah, so you see that. So changing hands from generation to generation and the oppression getting worse.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's where, actually, I'll tie it into the Passover a little bit too, and hopefully I remember all this right. Where, going back to Joseph really quick, we have the beginning there where you have like a lettuce leaf, which they have a name for, and I can't remember what it is. And you dip that into, I believe it's oil and salt. And then you eat that, and it tastes disgusting. But it's supposed to symbolize the lamb that was killed and Joseph's coat that was rubbed in, or the lamb's blood that was rubbed on the coat.
Yeah.
And then presented to his father to showing like, look, Joseph got murdered.
Yeah, right.
It's supposed to us kind of going through that same symbolism there. And then it leads us into the slavery, which is where we have the bitter herb that people partake in, which is, I think it's usually just like horseradish with some other stuff.
Yeah, depending on where you do it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it puts you through that, makes you tear up, and it puts you through that bitterness that the Israelites experienced in slavery, and then the tears of like, we're going through their suffering with them.
Yeah.
So that's a cool side of the Passover meal that I find interesting is it's kind of putting you through symbolically the same experience they had. So it's like we are also going through slavery in Egypt and being delivered from the Lord. The Lord is delivering us at the end of it.
Yeah.
That's kind of the other symbol that is drawn from there.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that like I feel like we don't like to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that there's a tradition like that that causes visceral reactions
Yeah.
that you wouldn't potentially like, but you're doing it anyways, even though you know it's coming.
Yes.
In order to remember on a very physical level what the Lord did for his people.
Right.
And that's one of those things like I was just talking about this the other day about physical preparation for spiritual events. So like one of the things that something like fasting is that type of practice where you're basically telling like Jesus said, man does not live on bread alone.
Yeah.
When he's in the desert being tempted. And it's that truth of saying like, I'm not of this world, right? This physical body is of the dust of this world. It does not control my actions. So I'm putting it down for the sake of putting my attention on the Lord. And kind of, so physical preparation for spiritual events would be like if I'm preparing for a Sunday and on Friday or Saturday, I'm doing things physically, like taking a long run or going for a long bike ride, something that's physically intense to kind of wear my body out a little bit.
Yeah.
And not in a way that would make it difficult for me to do what I need to do on Sunday, but in a way that realigns my heart and mind and puts my flesh in the position where it should be. Yeah. Which is being subdued by the Spirit, right? So it's like
absolutely.
So that's it's like kind of like that's why like a really like anybody would say like a good workout feels good when it hurts, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like oh, when it hurts, like that's when you know it's good.
You're doing something.
Yeah, and there's something about that, and what that is spiritual awareness. Like really, at the end of the day, that's what that is. So in a lot of ways, that's why people go to the gym all the time. Yeah, because they're not fully aware that they should just go to church. You know what I mean? Yeah, like they're getting spiritually aligned to nothing. But they're doing the action of putting their flesh down. Yeah. Right. So.
No, that's true. Yeah, because you're disciplining your body, going against what you want to do, right, and doing what you know you should do. I know one of the things I've been doing a lot lately is, especially early in the morning, I wake up at like 4:30, which is early, and I don't like it. I fight it every morning, but I'll get up and I'll walk about 5 or 6 miles. Yeah. So it takes about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours. Sure. And one thing that I've enjoyed about it is, one, it makes me uncomfortable. I hate it. Yeah. I don't bring headphones with me, so it's extremely boring.
That's the hardest part.
Oh, it's so awful. And I intentionally leave my phone at home, so it's like I don't have anything to distract me here. And
how do you keep track of your steps?
I don't.
Honestly, that would be the hardest part for me.
I think.
Or it'd be like, who's keeping record of what I'm doing?
I did it, I promise.
Oh, man.
But the one thing I love is before I go, I'll usually read. I've been reading out of either Psalms, Proverbs, or Ecclesiastes lately. And I'll usually read a chapter of that and then spend that whole 2 hours. Sometimes it's like 30 minutes, and the other hour and a half, I'm just off in La La Land.
Yeah, the wisest man and his dad.
Yeah,
right.
It's true, and it's a good way to start the day. Yeah. But I love that. Like, it puts me in a very boring situation, but all I have is scripture here to meditate on, and it helps me kind of realign to that. It's like, oh well, here's what the scripture says. Yeah. Now let me pray. Let me think about that, and see where that leads me. But it's that idea of like putting ourselves in situations to prepare ourselves for a spiritual event, physically preparing ourselves, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Israelites continued to like build monuments,
Yeah.
not to worship, but as a reminder to the
Mm.
generations that came after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that was an important distinction where they would, like when eventually on the other side of this, spoiler alert, they walk over the Jordan
Yeah.
River and the 12 stones that they put up as a monument
Mm.
to remember what the Lord did for them.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
all linked back. That's kind of like the end of the
True.
of where the Passover kind of begins. But yeah, it's that type of thing, and we don't have a ton of those things. So I think that type of thing where yeah, because there's also a tradition in Shabbat, the Shabbat dinner, which is basically the Sabbath dinner, that is a weekly thing.
Yeah.
That has elements of the Passover Seder in it. And one of the things that the Jewish tradition has within it is this idea that the kids, up until the age of, I think, 13, traditionally, they would go to school all week learning from the Torah. And one of the things that they would do is they would learn and try to find things in the Torah that they could then on Friday night when they were having dinner with their family could ask their dad to try and stump them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so the kids would kind of work
cool.
all week and have this like side game going where they're trying to find something in the Torah that their dad wouldn't have the answer to.
Wow.
Which is such a profound thing.
That's so cool.
Because that means that the kids are trying to better or best their
Yeah.
dad. But think about that as a dad.
That's so cool.
Because like as a dad, you can't just like hope you know everything.
Right.
You got to stay studied up.
Yeah.
Because then you have to be the example in that instance,
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what if your dad's the one that never knows the answer? You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I guess it's not really an answer to that. It just
easier
means
to better him, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. But like, I imagine you don't want to be that dad,
Right. Yeah.
And maybe even potentially you don't want to be that kid either. And that's,
True.
but that's a tradition too that like that I always found really profound that like doesn't really translate really well into the Western space. It's not 1950 anymore, but we still want to eat with our whole family in front of the TV and not really talk to each other, and then hope that everybody's okay. But everybody ate and talked a little bit about their day and, had a treat and went to sleep, and you get up the next day and you do that for long enough and you're like, well, where's the spiritual rhythm? Where's the grounding to this? So the feast elements, and then, most Christians only go to church on Easter. So, but they're not doing this.
Yeah.
They're not remembering the Passover. They're not remembering they're not necessarily remembering the whole story.
True.
They're just being told they need Jesus.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's even because a big part of where this...
And they do, by the way.
They do believe in Jesus?
No, they need him.
Oh, yeah. No, they do. We all need Jesus. You're not wrong about that. That's where it's like for us in the Western side, we have communion.
Right.
Which a lot of that comes from what Jesus did at Passover. Which I think
literally
that's such an interesting part where kind of leads into the second half of this where I find amazing is, at least for me, I forget when I read the story that they're literally doing this.
Yeah.
It's like they're in the midst of this, and this is something that they all would have grown up doing. Like this is a normal practice for them.
Yeah.
And then Jesus is singing these songs, reading these psalms. They're all participating. And then he goes, oh, yeah, here's this bread. And by the way, this is my body.
Right.
They're like, sorry, what? That's not in the script.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like I was just thinking about this year for the first time in a really tangible way, where I said it out loud to my wife and I was like, that sounds like duh. But the truth is like, because I did always think about that, like, okay, yeah, Jesus has a couple moments like that where, like when he's in, I believe Capernaum, and he reads from the scriptures, and everyone's like, oh man, that was so great. And then he looks at him and goes, I'm that guy.
Yeah.
And then they try and push him off the cliff.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of moments like that where in that instance, like you said, they grew up doing the Passover Seder. They grew up doing it with their families. And now they're doing it with their rabbi, with their teacher.
Yeah.
And now their teacher is saying, I'm the fulfillment of this.
Right.
But the thing about the Passover is the Passover meal, the original Passover meal, was the lamb, right? Am I getting that right? It was a lamb, right?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
It was a lamb, and they were to use all of it.
Yeah.
Not have any of it left. And take the blood and put it over the doorpost, right? So that the evil spirit would pass by.
Yeah.
Pass over those, right? Pass
right.
over those houses. And what happens with Jesus in that instance is he's saying, like, let's take the bread. This is my body.
Yeah.
And when he's saying that, he's saying it in the context of he's the Lamb of God.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do this Passover dinner anymore.
Yeah.
He's saying, I'm fulfilling it.
Yeah.
I'm the last lamb.
Yeah.
That ever needs to be sacrificed for you to be okay.
Yeah.
And for you to find salvation. So they're doing it every year. They're sacrificing over and over again for their sins, waiting for a savior.
Yeah.
And it's like the high priest prophesies in the temple with Jesus saying, like, it's better for one man to die for a nation, right? And it's that prophecy of saying, like, he is that guy. He's not what this meal was.
Yeah.
He's what this meal was reminding us of and pointing us to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why keep doing this? Not just to remember, but in the hope for the day where we will be with God, right? So that's kind of the beauty of that. Like, do this in remembrance of me.
Yeah.
Which is what they were already doing.
It's true.
But when he says, do this in remembrance of me, not do this in remembrance of what God did in Egypt, which is what the Passover Seder was doing.
That's what they're remembering.
Yeah, they were remembering not who Jesus was,
right?
But they were remembering what God did for them in Egypt.
Yeah.
During the meal. And he all of a sudden just says, do this in remembrance of me.
Yeah.
So now I'm the lamb, the last lamb, right?
Yeah.
And that's an extremely radical statement in the context of the meal they're having.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not doing this like, he didn't have to say, hey guys, we're not doing this in remembrance of what God did in Israel. God is here now among you.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, now do it in remembrance of me. And then later says, in my name, right?
Yeah.
So pray in my name.
Yeah.
So you have...
So cool.
Yeah, so like it's cool. The culmination of all of that, right? And it seems simple. It's like, oh, like do this in remembrance of me. It's the I am statement.
Yeah.
It's all of that stuff kind of all happening all at once. Like, whoa. Well, yeah, duh.
And it's funny now when we look at it, it's like, oh, of course.
Yeah.
But this is such a new thing. But at least for the time, it was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like the relationship with the disciples over and over again, not all of them got it. Like it even says like, and then once he ascended, they realized what he was talking about. Right? So there's even things like that where they're like,
it's so true.
Where it's like even the witnesses to the disciples, the ones writing their accounts, are saying, yeah, and then by the way, eventually they figured it out.
Finally.
Like once he left, they were like, oh, right? Yeah, and that's always so funny to me.
I love that.
Because we do that. We forget. We don't realize what's happening.
It's funny you say that too, because one of my favorite little side points in that moment of the Last Supper is when Jesus says, "Oh, the one who dips in the same bowl as me will betray me."
Yeah.
And what do they all do? They all go like, well, surely not me, Lord, right? And what's funny about that, because when I read that, I was always like, well, yeah, it's Judas. Duh. He's the one who's like, should be pretty obvious. Like,
yeah, you already
who's
knew.
the one guy?
Yeah.
But then you think about it, it's like, well, which of the disciples betrayed Jesus? All of them. They all turned
Don't they all dip in the cup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like they all do.
Yeah.
And what I find so fascinating about that is, and so we see even in Exodus. So it's like, okay, God does these just incredible things. With the plagues, they see this. They're taken through, crossing the Red Sea. Like there's some just absolutely amazing things that are happening.
Yeah.
And then they're taken to the base of Mount Sinai where Moses then goes up. And what happens during that? They're just like, yeah, so he's done some cool things, but I'm going to start worshiping a cow soon. And they all turn and betray.
Sure.
But yet, God still gifts them the Torah. He still gifts them the Ten Commandments, says, you need this.
Yeah.
And then we see in the New Testament, everybody turns and betrays Jesus. And yet he still comes and he says, here's a gift, which is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And it's such a story of God's faithfulness and how we just continually fail.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I find really, really cool about especially the symbolism and what Jesus does at the Passover meal is, so in Exodus, from the moment that they Passover first happens, the first Passover,
Yeah.
to when the Ten Commandments is given is 50 days.
Sure.
And it's like, that's cool. That's when God gifted the law. And then we see from the Passover meal that Jesus celebrates and how he reinterprets it as far as like, hey, this is why you're doing it. It's me.
Yeah.
Then to his ascension and then to Pentecost is 50 days as well.
Yeah.
And what happens at Pentecost, we see God symbolically, we see him in fire in the Old Testament at Mount Sinai. And then in the New Testament at Pentecost, we see the fire representing the Holy Spirit in each individual.
Right.
And we see that up on Mount Zion.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's incredible.
Yeah.
First, God
Or
is
Mount
here.
Moriah.
And
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And,
Well, it is Zion though.
Okay, cool.
I mean, they call it Zion's like
much different names.
Like that's a psalm, like worship the Lord in Zion.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's like more like a city name.
Yes.
But the mountain is Mount Moriah. Sorry, keep going.
Oh, no, that's what we need here. I need to be held accountable. But yeah, so we see that, and it's like, and then God gifts the Holy Spirit, and he wrote the law on our hearts.
Yeah,
He gave us the Spirit so that we could do this better.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying in the sense of like the fire, the all-consuming fire.
Yeah.
Is you can't touch it.
Yeah.
So like Moses can't touch it, right? But then what does the Lord do at the day of Pentecost? He sets that fire upon us.
Yeah.
And he essentially then at that point dwells within us.
Right.
Which is, profound. It's like the holy that you couldn't touch is now making you holy so that it can dwell in you.
Yeah.
Which is, that's wild.
So cool.
But even you said like with the grace of what Jesus did, even though everybody betrayed him and everybody messed up, going back to what you said with that, I feel like there's an important piece in that where I think sometimes we talk about that as the grace of God and what Jesus did for us. It made it easy for us. And it did, but it didn't just make it easy for us. It made it possible for us.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference in that. Because the fact is none of us, we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. Mm-hmm. So if that's true, then none of us could have been perfect enough to be the sacrifice we individually needed to be with a holy God. So in that instance, like the grace of God in Jesus is not just making it easy for us, it's making it possible for us. So like, there's something profound about that, right? Because the fact is it's not actually easy.
Right.
It's easier than if we had to do it on our own. But the grace of God is making the way.
Yeah.
Right? So like same thing with the Passover. It's like They couldn't save themselves. They literally either God saves them or they die.
Yeah.
Those are the two options.
Yeah.
So you might go like, the grace of God made it easy. Sure, but made it possible. Otherwise, death was going to happen.
Right. Right.
And then what happens? Well, God had a plan, and his plan stops. That wasn't going to happen. You know what I mean? So like children of Israel don't make it through the Red Sea. His plan stops. Like that feels dangerous to say.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But the fact is those
That's
are
true.
his people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean he's not going to reestablish a group of people on the earth.
Yeah.
Because he did that before.
Right.
Right? He's already done that. And I think in some ways, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to.
You're getting dangerous. I love it.
Well, I just think like, at some point he's like, okay, fine. Let me just part the sea. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't want to have to restart another group,
Yeah.
And that's just, being funny. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, like God's plan stops right there. And you see that all the way through. Even when you jump into like King David and Goliath. If David dies, that's the line of Jesus.
Right.
Well, that's a problem, right?
It's true.
But so many people, the person that was put in the position of life or death, if they die and don't live, the lineage of Jesus ends.
Right.
The plan of God ends.
Yeah.
Right? So it will come to pass.
Yeah.
And you can see that in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Because there's a moment of life or death. And death means God's plan ends.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think that's an interesting point even to bring up. Actually, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
What a good guy.
Too much sugar.
Yeah, I'm gonna be up all night. For us to put in that idea of like, it's possible that it could have failed. Which it sounds dangerous when we talk, because people like to bring in, well, God's sovereign. It wouldn't have failed. It's like, but it could have.
Sure.
Which is what you're saying. There's that possibility that this could have failed. We know that it didn't because we're on the other end of it.
Yeah, and theoretically, there were moments where it did, right?
Where changes happen.
I mean, I feel like I'm afraid to say that, and because it's not even theoretical.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's changes happening.
Yeah.
There's things happening.
I mean, we see Samuel say that to Saul. That's a big one I like bringing up, where he tells Saul, it's like, hey, if you had obeyed what God commanded you to do, your line would have stayed established as king.
Right.
It's like your lineage would not have ended, but it will end because of your disobedience.
Yeah.
And that's when we see David take over. It's like, well, did David have to become king of Israel? No. That was still the line of Jesus.
Right.
But things changed because of our actions.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess with God's sovereignty in that conversation, that's a free will conversation.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because
it's true.
Because it's like, well, no, I mean, if God's sovereign, then Saul didn't have a choice. He was doomed to that. Well, maybe not.
That's fair. Actually, I did an episode on sovereignty recently, which you guys should check out if you haven't. And for me, I'm actually really curious to hear your thoughts on this. So my big conclusion, I'm jumping past an hour of content and logical arguments to it, which is like, I think we extend the idea of what sovereignty is beyond what it actually is. And looking at it, I think rightly, it's God's right to rule his people. It's his right to be the ruler of his creation.
You're saying as a definition for sovereignty?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is pretty simple. And without any context.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think the thing that I like about that is it has nothing to do with us.
Right.
And I think that when we talk about sovereignty, God's sovereignty, and do we have free will, it's about us.
Yes.
And it's probably the wrong way to have the conversation.
I think so.
Like if we're talking about God's sovereignty, like he created us to have a relationship with us, which doesn't make any sense.
No, not at all. I don't know why. We're not very good at being friends or family.
But in some ways, that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like in some ways, you can see the beauty of God's creation in the fact that we, like, even though God knows beginning from the end, in some ways there's a beauty in our unpredictability or unpredictability of kind of going like, well, they could and probably will turn away from me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, the sovereignty conversation is a whole different thing. But I
It's
like
a big conversation.
I like that idea as like a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Just simply based on the fact that it has nothing to do with us.
Yeah.
Which I feel like
Yeah.
is what God's sovereignty is.
Yeah.
It's that God is.
Yeah.
And whatever he is,
That's
he
what
is.
he told us. Yeah.
And there's nothing we can do about that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And maybe that's the core of what you're saying. Is
Yeah.
God's sovereignty is just simply the fact that we are along for the ride.
Right.
And if we stay obedient, the ride is potentially not as rough. Right? Or let me say it this way. If we stay obedient, we get to stay on the ride. And if we don't, that's when we get off the ride.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, maybe that's the whole, like, God's sovereignty is that he has a plan and he's going to fulfill that plan.
Right.
And
we have the choice to be a part of it or not.
Through the grace of Jesus, yeah.
Yeah.
And so because of that, we're able to jump on board with the creator of the universe creating. And if we stay obedient, we get to do that.
Yeah.
If not, we're off the ship. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think his holiness is the reason why we would either be on or off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if we're not a holy dwelling place for a holy God, then we can't dwell with the holy God if we're not holy.
Yeah.
He is necessarily making everything that he comes in contact with holy. And that either results in death or life.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Passover.
Passover is great.
It is. I think there's I think there's so much beauty in the Jewish tradition that we really miss out on. And again, I feel like maybe that's a millennial statement. You know, I think some people, I think some Christians, personality-wise, background, the way they view the world, I think they do just fine.
Yeah.
Being Christians in a Western context.
Yeah.
I don't.
I definitely need more.
Yeah, I feel like, our pastor has said this, I feel like a lot recently, but the fact is like, there's more Old Testament than there is New Testament.
Yes.
Like in the Holy Canon, there's more Old Testament than the New Testament. And he didn't say this, but this is something I'm saying in the context of that. But when I look at that, I feel like if we want to understand what Jesus is talking about, we have to understand the context of where and when he is talking. Because he's very specific with his words.
Yeah.
And even though it is absolutely relevant and transcendent to us now, he was talking to them.
Right. Right.
I mean, I think even John at the end says, at the end of the Gospel of John, that if everything Jesus did was written down, there would not be books to contain it in the earth. And so I think that's part of it. It's like maybe unfolding the context of it for us and understanding like, okay, what is he saying? Because there's several moments, we even just talked about this, but like where he reveals the scriptures or opens up the scriptures to them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even like Paul or the two people that Jesus appears to walking on the road, after he's resurrected. What it says is that he reveals the scriptures to them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean he starts reading Romans. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
Paul's not in the mix yet.
Right.
So
right.
like, what's he revealing to them? He's revealing himself to them through
Yeah.
the Old Testament,
Yeah.
the scriptures that they know.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things I'm most fascinated with right now is what scriptures did they know, but also what context did they understand? Like what things were they very aware of as oral tradition and specific context of their times and literary stories and even the things taught in the synagogue.
Yeah.
You know, like the Talmud, the idea that there's it is from man, but held at the same esteem as the Torah is from God in the Jewish tradition. So you're looking at those two things. You're like, okay, well, like the detail of the sacrificial system is more extensive in the Talmud. Yeah. Well, why is that? Fear of God. They wanted to make sure generations were getting it right. So they made it even more specific than God did.
Yeah.
So you have more rules added by man, which then results in, Pharisaical law, which is essentially the Talmudic law, which is basically you have to do it these 100 steps, even though the Lord only gave us 60.
Yeah.
It's like, well, okay. Like, I mean, I guess that's safer. Hey, if you add this one thing, it actually makes it safer for you to get this other thing correct.
Yeah.
And so it's just fear of not doing it the wrong way.
It removes the ability for more loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which if that's the process of not being destroyed by God and living in a fear, a holy reverence of God, then so be it. But that's kind of what Jesus' point is. It's like, guys, you're missing the whole idea. Like you added all of these steps. And it's not necessarily, he's not even saying that's a bad thing. He's just saying like the whole point of all of this was me.
Yeah.
And I'm here now. It's like when the Pharisees say, hey, like why do the other teachers of the law fast, but your disciples never do? It's like, well, because the groom's here.
Yeah.
Like, would you fast at a wedding? You know what I mean? And that's his whole point. It's not like what you guys are doing is stupid.
Right.
No, what you guys are doing is all kind of awesome.
Right.
And that's why I'm here to tell you like, okay, you don't have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think that's a part that I missed for a long time, and I think we miss a lot, is we look at the Pharisees and say they're bad guys. They're the bad guys. But it's like, no, they're the ones trying to do it right.
Yeah, and they're part of generational traditions.
Yeah.
Of trying to stay holy.
They're the most pious people at that time.
Yeah.
But they were so focused, like you said, on those details and like, let me just do this and do that they missed what Jesus was saying. Is like, you missed the point of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see it even in modern traditions.
Yeah.
Where somebody might start an offset or a movement off of something and it gets obscured.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, okay, the son of the guy who started this movement after the dad died just took this weird turn. You're like, well, if you could just bring the dad back, what would he say about it, what his son's doing?
Yeah.
And he would probably say like, hey, you missed the point of this.
Yeah.
Like why we were doing this was not for that.
Right.
And now all you're doing is that, and you're missing altogether why we were doing the first thing. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what Jesus is saying is like,
yeah.
Or in some ways, it's revealed through the teachers of the law asking him, what's the most important commandment?
Yeah.
Love God, love people. It's like, it's almost like they were setting him up to summarize the entire law.
Yeah.
And when he did, they were astounded by it. And then kept doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, that's the beauty of the Passover in having the whole story. Is kind of saying like, what's crazy about it is we know about the Passover. From the same book, we know about the fulfillment of the Passover.
Yeah.
To where we know the whole story
Hmm.
and didn't need to be in any of it.
Yeah.
Which is real weird.
Yeah.
So like for our perspective, going back to like we look at the Pharisees and we look down on them. Well, we didn't live in the state where the Passover was for the intent of remembering what God did in Egypt, which is what he told us to do.
Yeah.
Remember what I did in Egypt. And then Jesus said, you can stop doing that and just remember what I did for you on the cross.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Because ultimately, this is what it's about.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some ways, he's not even saying, he's saying, now remember it all up to me, but do it through me.
Yeah.
So like, remember the Passover.
Yeah.
But remember that the God who rescued you out of Egypt also came down, dwelt among you, and died on the cross for you.
Yeah.
So not only did he give you in Egypt the opportunity to, hey, kill a lamb, eat the whole thing, put the blood on the doorpost, and you'll be saved. Now I'm going to come, and you don't have to sacrifice anymore.
Yeah.
And everybody can be saved.
Yeah.
Not just Israel, but also Egypt. Right? So there's like the beauty in that.
Yeah.
I also love the like how Egypt plays such a role in Israel's story.
True.
Cause like, you know, Jesus ends up in Egypt. Yeah. Which is always really funny. Like it's funny when all that stuff, it's like a short side note. It's like, cause they have to flee. So
there's so many of those just like small details in there that it's like, it's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even looking at, one of the things that I also find interesting is when they're partaking in the cup at Passover, Jesus doesn't. And he says, all of you drink, but I won't drink until I come back and you guys are all with me in the new kingdom.
There's your answer about alcohol.
We can all drink. If your name's Jesus, you got to hold off.
I mean, you couldn't have set that up more perfectly.
That's pretty great.
No, I'm just kidding.
This has been great. This has been so much fun.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you'd like to
on what?
finish?
Passover or on everything?
Everything. Yeah.
I think I'm going to butcher this, but I think there's an old Jewish joke that there were two men who always got together and would furiously argue over the Torah and the things in the Torah. Then they make it to, well, the joke is that they make it to heaven, which in the Jewish tradition doesn't make sense. That's a whole other thing.
You go down to Sheol.
But they go to Abraham's bosom.
That's right.
And as they're there,
I love that.
Or I guess the joke would be funnier if one of them's in Sheol and one's in the depths and then one's in Abraham's bosom.
One went to Tartarus.
Now we're getting this is part.
This is the other
Tartarus.
conversation.
Yeah, the two parts of Hades. But yeah, so they're arguing and the archangel Michael comes up and what are you guys arguing about? And they tell them, and he goes, "Oh, well, this is what happened." And they look at him, they're like, "Why would you tell us that?" And it was like the core of their friendship
to argue about this point.
Yeah, and in some ways, I feel like that's the beauty of theology and the gift it is to us.
Yeah,
that we can have long conversations about this, and all we're doing is communing with one another and the Lord.
Yeah.
And so as we do that, it's this piece where like at the end of the day, it's like, does Genesis 6, do the Nephilim, what are demons? Like when you go through all of this stuff is like at the end of the day, like the story is about Jesus.
Yeah.
Let's start there and then let's have fun with all the other stuff.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
But let's do like what Paul asked us to do, which is pay attention to who's in the room,
Mm.
who's listening.
Mm.
Because if you have people that are listening that are potentially confused by what you're talking about, don't talk about that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then in the podcast forum, you just kind of go like label it so they know not to walk in the room.
True.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, and I think people do a pretty decent job of that. But yeah, for me, I feel like it's like, I think one of the gifts that the Lord has given us, is his written word, not just to commune with him directly one-on-one, but also in the assembly and 2 or 3 gathering together, with juice and coffee mugs, right? So
Yeah,
I feel like there's beauty in all of that, because the fun
cool.
is tying it in, going episode 49, you know?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
49 days. There's another 49 days. It all ties in, you know, like it's like, and it's like, did God orchestrate that? Was it his sovereignty orchestrating it? It's all about Jesus. It's just fun to talk about.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And so like at the end of the day, I think, to me, I feel like that's the whole thing, is like, you know, love God, love others. Yeah. And be careful of who's in the room when you're talking.
Yeah.
I feel like that's an important thing.
That is huge.
So, and maybe that's more advice than a final thing I'd want to say, but yeah, I think that's always the thing, is like, so maybe that's the crux of what I'm saying is, don't shy away from things in the Bible that are weird to you. Don't shy away from things in the Bible that are hard for you. Don't shy away, and also don't push people away when they start talking about things in the Bible that they're confused about.
Yeah.
You know I heard a lot growing up, like, this just what it is. But that's not, I just want to talk about the Bible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not actually looking for an answer. And that's frustrating to people. And I get that, but at the same time, God's a mystery.
Right.
And like, is there an answer to it? Yeah, but like, none of us know what it is.
Right.
And it's not really even that important to the story. And if it is, maybe we'll know later, maybe we won't. I don't know that it matters. You know what I mean? The details of these things. Why was this number used? Why? How come when the disciples go and eat breakfast with Jesus after the resurrection, why is there 153 fish?
Yeah.
Is that the amount of numbers that spell out Yahweh?
And who counted all 153 of them?
Well, so they brought the fish in. Okay, so to that point, to that point, he says, "Hey, cast on the other side." And they're like, "Fine." They cast on the other side, bring it in, and then I think it's Peter that jumps off the boat and swims in. What's funny is that he put his coat on and then jumped in the water.
It's chilly.
Yeah. Then they know the number. And it says that when they knew the number, they knew it was the Lord.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, so numbers are significant.
Yeah.
But are they significant to us? No, they were significant to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And can that be significant to us? Sure. I mean, for fun.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But like 153 fish, that's not going to, like, maybe that is a fun conversation that does lead someone in relationship to Jesus. But most likely that person would be reading in Hebrew or reading in Greek.
Yeah.
And be able to see that in the context. But that's one of those things that's like, no, that was for them. And you know how we know is it tells us. And that's how they knew it was the Lord.
Yeah.
So like the number was important to them, and then the writer tells us why. So the answer's already there.
Yeah.
What's the 153? Well, that's how they knew it was the Lord. Answer
So it was
solved.
a direct connection. We can see that right there. He tells us. Yeah.
And I think maybe I've heard like potentially that is like the number for Yahweh or something like that.
Oh, okay.
When it's written in Hebrew, or I don't. But it would have been written in Greek, spoken in Aramaic.
Yeah.
Again, it tells us why the number is important. So.
But to your point with that too, it's fun because what we're doing is we're pursuing truth, we're pursuing Christ. Yeah. And at the end of it, that's the most important thing. The story doesn't change, and if what we're pursuing changes the story, well then we're not pursuing the right thing.
Right.
So it is like, but we don't know that unless we have those conversations with people. We have those those difficult, because the Bible's weird. The Bible's freaky. It's got a lot of weird stuff. It's got a lot of crazy stuff. And that's part of what makes it so fun. And it all tells the same story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and it wasn't weird to them.
right.
In some ways, the world was weirder to them
Hmm.
than what was written down.
Yeah.
And to us,
Yeah.
I think that's for me, I'm like, man, what was that world like?
Yeah.
Because our world seems real boring. Like, if the Bible is that interesting and it was a fraction of what actually happened,
Yeah.
must have been wild.
If Herodotus is right and there's flying snakes just going around, like, what was that?
Yeah. Nothing's new, man.
Yeah.
Dragons come from somewhere, right?
That's true. That's true.
Everything comes from the Bible. It all does. It's
So
all in
cool.
there. Tradition, medieval. Yeah, it's all there.
Well, hey,
Yeah.
thank you again.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
I definitely want to do this again, and I hope to have you back on soon.
Absolutely.
This is great.
Yeah. Let's do it again in 10 minutes.
I'm in. Well, 50 days, right?
Okay. Yes. Yeah, we'll wait till episode 98.
Done. I got to make a lot
Every
of content
49th.
really quick.
We'll just do Passover again next year.
Done.
I'm just kidding. I mean, we can, but
as
we
long
do
as that's in like 3 weeks.
yeah. Let's do that.
Awesome. And Abear, shout out to you.
Shout out.
He's been behind the scenes making this cool, making this awesome. I had a fake producer a couple episodes ago that I made up, but it was just me. And now I've got an actual person here, and this has been awesome. So yeah, thank you. Shout out to you.
Yeah. Next
And-
time, let's get him on mic.
Oh, we got to get him on mic. I want to hear what's going on because he's just hearing us say crazy stuff. And thank you guys for listening. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of this. And at the end of it, I think what we walk away from is let's just continue to pursue truth. Let's continue to have these conversations. And if it's weird, it's important, and let's look at it. And I will talk to you hopefully sooner rather than later.